Can you talk about some of the best investments that Speciale has made, and then also some of the investments that you have had a chance to be a part of? And in case you could also mention some of the startups or opportunities that you guys have missed out on, in case that's okay.
Yeah. I think so much of the Speciale portfolio is so unique in its own way, right? Cosmos, Galaxy, Kava Space, Inspecity. Speciale actually has the largest space tech portfolio in India. Only because we have been the earliest believers of space tech from India, and one thing led to another, and we now have multiple investments in the space tech sector. Similarly, I would say in semiconductors, similarly in green hydrogen, quantum computing, correct? I wouldn't say the largest, but the earliest backers in so many of these sectors has been Speciale. So, very unique companies in very different sectors, very different founders, very different approach to company building that each of them have. So it's been very just fulfilling to see some of these startups, their journeys. Personally, for me, working purely in the AI software and infrastructure space inside of Speciale, I've been a part of 3 investments that have gone through that we have decided to invest. Each of them with its own learnings, obviously. Very different spaces, all interlinked, similarly in data infrastructure, modern data stack, AI, generative AI, infrastructure software. So very much in that space, but very different problem statements, will be used by very different folks inside of organizations. Very different founders, very different risks that we underwrote in each of these businesses. Just because the sector is the same doesn't mean that, the risk is also the same. In one, there's a market risk. In another, there's the risk of just building the product and underwriting some of that technology readiness as well that we previously spoke of. So very different risks in that. I think when it comes to anti-portfolio, which is the question that you asked, that, companies that you regret missing out on, I think there's a company called Rockfish Data, and so much of my learnings in data infrastructure and synthetic data particularly came from that particular startup. But for whatever reason, we decided not to go through with that investment. But, every company teaches you so much. Spending time with founders who have done this longer than you ever will. Because they're so deep in that particular sector, and you are not, and you're only learning from them and trying to understand that space and looking at different aspects of the business that maybe they, being in the nitty-gritties of the business, are not able to. That, zoom out lens that a VC is able to bring also means that we are able to, add value to founders that they previously couldn't see for themselves. And so each company is different, each business is different, each founder is different. Just because, 2 founders went to the same university, have similar backgrounds, doesn't mean that their personal journeys and motivations are very similar. Right? But the kind of backgrounds they might come from and the kind of money they want to make from, their aspirations for the business, what they want, they're all going to be so different. And so interacting with founders from different backgrounds also means that they will have personal, stories that are very different, and being able to navigate that, understand that, empathize that, I think it's very, very different, and every story is particularly different, right? So, no day is similar to the other. Really, that's what keeps me excited about this job.
So, what are your thoughts on the government support for DeepTech? Is it useful? And if yes, how satisfied you are as a VC with respect to the steps that government has taken to specifically support DeepTech as a sector, space tech, AI, and in general, also the overall startup ecosystem in technology space?
We spoke about this to an extent, in the sense that there is the national DeepTech startup policy now. It's still a draft. It's still finalizing and coming into an act, hopefully, soon. But I think that's a good first step, in the sense now that we have a policy to begin with, to benchmark ourselves with. But, the devil's in the details and the pudding is in the execution. You know what they say? So it's really about being able to take this from here to, implementing it on the ground and seeing those echoes of change. And so there is so much that regulation can do in the deep tech space. Particularly so many of these sectors, privatization of space sector in India means that all of these startups are now possible. There's so much more investor interest in the sector. Just the market has opened up now for space startups. providing to new customers. Similarly with other sectors as well, which government policy has now become more supportive. There's a policy now. There's just um, recognizing of that sector has happened. Correct.
Yep.
So I think that's one. The second is so much of what we do is around technology differentiation, and so it comes into patent law, intellectual property rights, and we are not a patent first country. We are not a legislation first country. If something goes wrong, we don't first go to the courts because we know it's going to take a lot of time. But as a startup, if your moat is something technology wise that you have built and now have a patent in, how do you protect yourself?
Right.
I think there is a lot of questions to be answered there in terms of what regulation, what speed of courts. Most startups just kind of go around this problem by innovating more and more, and so anybody else can only catch up that much faster, and so they're always ahead of the curve to some extent. And the other bit is exits. Are you domiciled in India or are you domiciled abroad? As a fund, can you invest only in India, or can you invest in startups domiciled abroad as well? And what does that mean for exits? Can some of these companies be acquired by startups or companies that are domiciled abroad?
Right.
And there's a lot of regulation. There's a lot of policy stuff in each of these aspects, all the way from the fund where we can invest in, the sectors we can invest in, the sectors the government is supportive towards, and encouraging and recognizing and building and funding and granting startups.
Right.
But at the same time also to exits and corporate ventures programs and where are these startups domiciled. So I think there's a lot of policy talk around DeepTech, and it's a very good first step that we have a draft startup policy, but we'll have to see where that goes from here.
I think for most of the generic startups, the one question that I used to get a lot on LinkedIn and even Instagram, even whenever I go for talks, it's that is there a way for us to protect our idea, and should we even try to do that? And my answer, and probably this is also something that, to be honest, I learned from other people, and the answer has always been, don't care about the idea. The more you talk about it, the better it is, because if somebody had to beat you in implementation or execution, they anyway will. And there is anyway no way for you to protect ideas per se, right? But when I think about deep tech, that you got to be slightly more careful because the idea is actually the core of what you're doing over here, right?
That is true, but how many people can execute on that idea? Because you still can't believe how few people would be able to build, even if they knew how it was built. That's the challenge, right?
It's still consistent and it still applies. Not much about it.
I think so. Yeah.
So my question is, compared to other early stage roles, entry level roles, how hard is it to break into venture capital? And on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is extremely hard to 0 being fairly easy, where would you rate it?
I think anywhere between 7 and 9. It's hard, especially if you're not coming in extremely early into the role like I did, right? Like I did an internship. I'm an analyst now. I think it's very difficult because you can't learn the craft of venture if you're not in venture. And it's not particularly transferable skills. You might be a product manager, you might be something else outside in a startup setting or, another corporate setting, but you don't really learn the craft of venture and risk writing and risk underwriting and all of that elsewhere, correct? And so I think as much as you can learn about the ecosystem, how startups function, business model, all of that, underwriting risk is a very, very nuanced skill. And that's the core of what a VC does. Of course, VCs also, have to build network and so source the best companies. They also have to, support their companies after they have invested. And so, working knowledge, having been an operator yourself is very helpful in being able to help that founder. And so all of that is helpful. But I think the core job of investing itself is not something you can learn anywhere else, especially in private markets, especially where so much information is not really known, correct? Like you don't know how the sector will pan out. You don't know how the market will pan out. There's so many risks to be underwritten. And so I think, especially in more senior roles, it becomes that much harder. if you have not, built or, been like your own operator of your own right, either as an entrepreneur yourself or, among the founding team or a very senior member of a very large company, a startup that became a very large company, I think it's very difficult to transfer skills and become a VC after that. And so I would say it's very, very difficult. The other way to do it is start early, learn it on the job, do your grind as an analyst associate elsewhere and kind of learn that on the go. And that becomes, I think, a slightly easier thing to do because anyone can do this. Very few people can do the lateral entry.
Right. Interestingly, though, if you look at most of the senior folks in the VC ecosystem, when they were working back then, they did not have an option to kind of start early, right? Because the ecosystem did not even exist pretty much, right? Or there were very, very few people who were kind of very, very few VCs, very, very few roles, say 10 years back, 15 years back. So there was a lot of lateral transfer that kind of happened, right? A lot of operators working with some, well-known brands, even MNCs for that matter, FMCGs, service companies ended up joining the VCs. A lot of CFAs, CAs, folks who have been active investors in stock markets, they kind of ended up switching over to the VC side of the things. Do you think that the landscape has changed now for somebody who say has a good understanding of first principles in terms of how to build good businesses or what to look for in good businesses, and in general having the capability to be able to communicate and articulate thoughts? Do you think that folks who may not start early but have these skills can actually end up becoming a part of the VC ecosystem? Is that possible, or is it significantly harder as compared to what it used to be?
I would say it's harder today than it actually. No, I don't know, to be honest. I don't know because there is so much. 15 years ago, the startup ecosystem was also not super tight. So today, you can learn so much working in startups and then convert some of that experience into becoming a VC, mid-level or midway in your career. Some of these stories of people who have transitioned from other jobs into VCs and doing it really successfully at this point in time. They've, like, for example, Bloom, right? Like, I don't think any of them was at a VC fund traditionally previously. They were angel investors, though. They had their own portfolio of angel investments. They were very well active in that ecosystem, speaking to founders, understanding on the go, etc. Prime Venture Partners, was started by folks from the fintech ecosystem, and I think many of their first fund investments were in fintech. I don't know. It's a tough question. I don't know if it's harder today. Definitely, there's more to learn from, and if the ecosystem has already done that before, now you have all of these leaders you can train under, apprenticeship under, and then kind of learn the art of venture from them. And there's also so many more startups today, a thriving ecosystem that then you can reference and learn and build your skills from. Sorry, I really don't know. Which do you think is harder?
See, I definitely agree with you. If you're starting early, as far as we've been building leadership, what we've realized is that if you've started earlier and if you have some experience in either working with a startup in an active core team member role or a founder role for that matter, or you work with, say, an angel network or a venture studio, which is slightly closer models to VC as compared to your typical MNC roles. I think it is kind of slightly easier because you're able to understand the perspective better in terms of how VCs look at stuff, which I feel is the trickiest part of the job. It's not just about having an understanding of what's going on in the ecosystem, it's being able to dissect it in a way that helps you gain an unfair advantage. I think that's what VCs is all about.
And business consultants do that too, right? Dissecting a sector, being able to break that down. It's a very business consulting kind of approach. The outcome is different. You're not doing it to solve a particular problem for the business. You're looking to see if you want to invest or not. And of course, the uncertainties here are higher than that. But I think level, market breakdown, understanding
Mm.
very similar. And so we see a lot of, at least in junior and mid-level roles, we see business consultants coming in as well. We see your typical McKinsey, Bain, BCG kind of backgrounds coming in into VC as well.
So is that what a typical path to VCs can look like? You end up joining a well-known consulting firm, you work there, as a management consultant, hopefully, front end role or even in a back end role, but a role which kind of allows you to interact with startups or, more innovation-driven businesses per se. And then you kind of try to switch towards, pure VC or private equity side of the things. Is that what you will say a typical path to VCs currently looks like?
Yeah,
Somewhat?
very much, right? So an IIT or an IIM background followed a management consulting background, then a VC career. I think that seems to be one very straightforward route. The second is you built a company, and what of that startup, you have interacted with enough VCs. Enough VCs know you, trust you, know your the founder, and then kind of become a VC. Couple VC partners have been ex-founders themselves, correct? So I think that's another traditional route, and everything else is your own little story of how you hustled, right? Like my hustle was an internship. Someday, a portfolio of angel investments, especially at a senior stage. Maybe they invested in sufficient number of investments from their own personal wealth and guided those startups, and then kind of did this more professionally through other people's money, like pulled a fund together and then started a fund. So that's another route. Everything else, I think, is a story of hustle and happenstance and luck and arriving on this as a career option.
Right. So, while building the VC fellowship, one of the things that we realized is it's a very referral driven, a role to be in, right? So I've also seen folks, not being a part of either of these traditional routes, which is not a founder, not coming from an IIT plus IIM, but ending up in VCs because they networked extremely well, developed their skills, ended up developing a decent understanding of the space, and then breaking through. So what are your thoughts on it? Because it's still a 95% or probably even higher referral rates in terms of, the people who eventually end up getting hired.
Yeah.
Right?
No, absolutely. That's been my story as well. First starting out with volunteering stints, part-time, and then doing an internship and learning whatever I can in those 3 months. Being referred into a full-time role, correct? So that's been my story as well. And I think that's very, very true, because I didn't come from a management consulting or entrepreneurial or even a startup background for that matter. I was, in a traditional corporate setting, in a large MNC. And so I think that story of hustle and networking and just being referred into the role that I finally wanted has been my journey, and has also been the journey of a lot of people, because there's more VC firms today than there was ever in this country, correct?
Yeah.
A wave in 2015, 2016, where a lot of VC firms started. Post-COVID, I think a lot of new firms have now started. And so they're all looking to hire, especially in entry-level roles or mid-level roles in the organization. And they're willing to give that much more ownership to the people who walk in, because they want to be lean, frugal themselves. And so they want that much more to be taken by the folks who come in. And so if you can show to your hiring manager that you have built that network and background, and you understand the startup ecosystem, even to that little extent that you can, and you're willing to put in that time, effort, and energy to learn it on the job, a lot more people are now willing to take that bet on you than they ever were, because there are just that many roles today. Still very few, but more than there was ever in this industry in India.
So if I had to figure out what VCs look for in a young professional, can I say that they look for a willingness to hustle and network with a lot of folks, because that is something that they'll anyway have to do.
Yes.
An in-depth understanding of the space where the VC operates, at least curiosity to kind of know more about it, and some insights to show for that curiosity as, a sort of a proof per se. And thirdly, the ability to be able to communicate your thoughts and be able to, being able to clearly present what you are thinking, which is able to also give other people a perspective on how you're able to get to that particular thought, right? And all of that backed up with maybe some experience with startups or at least innovation driven businesses. Is that, can we call that a recipe to be able to break into VCs, according to you?
I think absolutely. I would only add one extra ingredient into our recipe, which is, I think, emotional intelligence. I think it's very important to have emotional intelligence in this job because it's full of people and relationships, and these are real people with real life stories. And
Yeah.
I think it's very important to be able to empathize, to say the right things, to be able to understand where people are coming from. All of that, I think, is very important. Also, culture fit into the organization.
Yeah.
If an organization is going to be 10, 15 people, like you said, at max 40 member teams, the largest of the funds, it's very important that you are a cultural fit with the rest of the folks in the organization. Correct? And that's a very subtle thing. You don't know what's not a cultural fit, but if you're not, it's going to be very difficult for you. Like I said, it's a lifestyle business in the sense that the lines between work and personal life are that much blurred. And so if you're always on the job, you better like the people you're working with. Otherwise, why would you do that to yourself? And so I think cultural fit and just high emotional intelligence.
Right. What do you think about the importance of an MBA for getting into a VC? Because I'm sure that you might have had a lot of conversations about this with your parents as well, because you were talking about how there was how there was an argument, a very positive argument in terms of figuring out if it's required for you at this stage.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts? I mean, is it something that people should look at, or should they not consider it? I mean, can you share a slightly more detailed perspective on this? Because I'm sure that a lot of people would want to know this.
So I think what I've arrived at this point in time is it doesn't take an MBA to break into VC,
Right.
but an MBA doesn't hurt to become a better investor.
Okay.
Right? So getting your foot in the door, becoming a VC, you can always learn it on the job. I think you can always learn it on the job. But while you're on the job, I think you're still learning from the circumstances that you are around, which is the insights of the firm, the partners in the firm, more people, more senior people in the organization that have done this longer. And so you're learning from them. And similarly, maybe you're learning from the few people in other funds that are willing to share their experiences with the startup and why they went through and how that investment worked out, all of that, right? So I think you can always learn on the job, but having an MBA means that you can perhaps just increase that exposure. And potentially, if you can learn the fundamentals of looking at any business, irrespective of sector, irrespective of everything else, maybe that just gives you a little more exposure to become a better investor when you do.
So you do think that MBA does equip people in terms of helping them get a better understanding of how businesses are built?
Yes, I think so. But I don't know if that's the only way to learn, correct? Because we do have some very OG investors in India who don't have a business background.
Yeah.
Right? And they learned it just day in and day out with founders, going through with other investors, sitting in board meetings and learning and seeing what's going on in the business, making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. And so I think there is no structure here, but I just feel like, and everyone is, very much entitled to the journey and learnings in their own respective ways that they will have. But why an MBA background can particularly hurt. I'm not even saying it'll increase your chances of breaking into VC.
Right.
Very clear, right? Like, I don't think that increases the chances of breaking into VC because remember, most people are going to come out with debt and fewer chances to take risks after MBA. And so maybe it doesn't increase the chance of a dream job in VC if that's what you're looking for. But maybe equipped with those skills and not in a traditional MBA setting. You can have that MBA setting on the job as well from other VCs, the partners. You can always learn that, I think, on the job and over time. But I think the idea is to become a better investor and to do well on the job, really. And I think to that extent, the skills of an MBA are not harmful.
So from a purely practical perspective, from an ROI perspective, if your end goal is to, say, join a VC, then it's probably not, you should probably go for an MBA because you could get that same experience by learning stuff on the job or by getting into, say, an internship program or, say, a fellowship like for that matter, we offer, or some kind of structured learning experience, right? Having said that, even if someone is pursuing an MBA, it's going to probably help them get a better perspective, but not give them a huge advantage in terms of breaking into a VC.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most VC firms have such few openings
Yeah.
that whether or not you have an MBA degree is one of the many more criteria.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So before I wind up the podcast, I'd want you to share like some insights for the VC fellows that we've been mentoring, and you've been mentoring primarily. Anything that you feel that they should know as they kind of figure out and navigate their way into venture capital ecosystem of India.
I think one thing that a lot of people forget is that fund life cycles are
Extremely long.
long. 10, 12 years for any one fund to wind up. So you might make an investment today, but you will only know, what transpired of this business, what risks you underwrote,
Right.
what you thought the business could become and what it actually did, only looking back many years later.
Right.
And if you are somebody that gets impatient with the outcomes of your work not being immediately visible, I think venture capital is a very, very difficult job to be in because it's long feedback cycles, long fund cycles. It takes time for all of this to come together and tie together into a cohesive story even for yourself. And yet you're expected to show up every day, work really long hours, blur the lines of work-life balance and just give it your all and be continuously optimistic. It's not an easy job at all. And so I think it's not meant for everybody as well in the sense that, you won't see the impact of your work immediately and you should be okay with that. And at max you own 10% of a company, 15% of a company, and your career and your everything depends on that 15% of a company. The founders still own the majority stake in the business. You don't get to control anything. And so as much time and effort you put into this work, there is still a hands-off approach because you cannot operate the business like a founder would. It's still the founder's business.
Right.
And so as involved as you are, you're also that detached. You know what I mean? So it's not for everybody. I find many people frustrated just by the extent of ambiguity in the job. So I think there's no way to know this for sure, which way you lean and what kind of inclination you have. But if you have any signals towards that, know that this is a tough job to be in.
Right. So there's a fair amount of patience that's required to see what you have sowed, per se, right, as a seed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, Shubhankita, for taking out so much time for this. I think it's been a very, very insightful conversation. I think both of us, both Ayush and I, we both didn't realize it's been like, 2 hours? More than 2 hours now. And we've been sitting and doing this. I did not feel tired at all. But yeah, this was amazing and really grateful for this. And I hope that all the listeners, all the viewers had a good time and probably gained something insightful from this. So looking forward to host you again in future.
Thank you. Thank you, Shawrya. Thanks, Ayush. Thank you.